Every town has its quiet symbols. For some, it's the bell at the schoolhouse that rings 5 minutes early on snow days. For others, it's the way the grocery clerk packs your bread on top, not because you asked, but because she remembers you hate it squished. In our town, it was the light. Not a lighthouse. Not a blinking neon sign. Just one small porch light on the corner of Maple and 3rd. It was always on. Always. The house belonged to the Everetts, an older couple by the time I was old enough to notice things. He was a mechanic, worked long hours under hoods, his hands permanently stained with engine black. She was the kind of woman who baked without recipes and remembered birthdays without a calendar. They had no children of their own, though I didn't learn that until much later. As a child, all I knew was that their porch light never went off. Day or night. Rain or shine. Blizzards, blackouts, didn't matter. That little bulb glowed like it had something to say. I used to pass their house on my walk home from school. Some days I lingered a little, pretending to tie my shoelace just to look at it. There was something comforting about that light, warm, yellow, steady. Not like the street lamps that buzzed or flickered or went out when you walked beneath them. This one glowed. It didn't light the yard. Didn't need to. It lit something else, something softer. A feeling, maybe? A memory. One afternoon, I finally asked my mom about it. "Why do the Everetts always keep their light on?" I said. She paused, drying a plate with slow, practiced hands. "They had a son," she said finally. "Went to the war. Never came home." I didn't know what to do with that sentence at 10 years old. It felt too heavy. Like trying to carry a full bucket with one hand. After that, the light changed for me. I still passed it every day. Still lingered. But now I saw it not just as a lamp, but as a kind of promise. As if they were still waiting. Not foolishly. Not hopelessly. Just faithfully. In winter, when the snow piled high and the wind pushed against your jacket like a challenge, that light became a star. A small sun in the gray. A reminder that someone, somewhere, still believed in returning. As I got older, I stopped walking that route. New friends, new streets, new distractions. But I never stopped thinking about that porch light. Even after Mr. Everett passed. Even after the mechanic's truck disappeared from the driveway and the garage door stayed closed for good. The light stayed on. Mrs. Everett, now alone, kept it burning. I wondered if it was still for her son. Or for her husband. Or maybe just for herself. To remind the world that some houses still remembered things the rest of us forgot. Years later, when I came home from college, I passed the house again. The porch was smaller than I remembered. The windows dimmer. But the light? Still on. Still glowing. Like time hadn't dared touch it. That night, over dinner, I asked my mom if she thought Mrs. Everett ever thought about turning it off. "No," she said softly. "She says as long as the bulb works, she'll let it burn." I nodded, pretending not to feel the lump in my throat. That spring, Mrs. Everett passed away in her sleep. Peacefully, they said. I went to the service, even though I hadn't seen her in years. People spoke about her pies, her laugh, her garden. But I remembered the light. And as we stood outside the church, the sun warm on our shoulders, someone asked quietly, "I wonder if they'll keep it on." No one answered. We all knew the light would go out now. But that night, as I drove down Maple, slow just to look, the light was still on. Someone, maybe a neighbor, maybe a relative, had turned it back on. Just for the night. And in that small act, I understood something that stayed with me ever since. Some lights aren't just bulbs. They're memory. They're presence. They're a way of saying, "This house remembers. Someone was loved here. Someone is still waiting in some way." That was the beginning of what I would later call the light that remembers. After Mrs. Everett passed, the house sat still. The garden grew wild. The mailbox leaned. The windows blinked back the sun like tired eyes. But the light stayed on. No one could say for sure who kept it going. Some guessed it was the realtor. Others said maybe the utility company forgot. But I knew better. Some lights burned for reasons wires can't explain. I moved away that summer. Not far, just enough to feel like I had turned a page. New apartment, new keys, new distractions. Still, there were nights, especially the quiet ones, when I'd picture that porch. And that light. I'd wonder if it was still glowing. Still holding its breath. Still remembering. 2 years later, I heard the house had sold. Not demolished, not gutted. Just bought. A young couple, someone said. Expecting their first child. They painted the shutters, cleaned the yard, planted tulips. And still, the porch light stayed on. Every evening. Same glow. Not brighter. Not dimmer. Just steady. Like it knew its job wasn't finished. One weekend, I was visiting home. I took the long route back from the store. Drove slow down Maple Street, heart beating like I was about to see an old friend. And there it was. The porch. The fresh paint. A wind chime now, gently whispering at the edge of the awning. And the light. Still on. I stopped the car. Sat there for a minute. Then, almost without thinking, I got out and walked up to the fence. A man, maybe 30, stood watering the flowers. He looked up, surprised but not unkind. "Sorry," I said. "I used to know the woman who lived here. Just passing by." He smiled. "Mrs. Everett?" I nodded. "She left behind good things," he said. We both glanced at the porch light. I asked carefully, "Did you keep that on for her?" He shook his head gently. "No. My wife wanted to turn it off, save the electricity. But our son, well, he asked why it was always on. We told him it was in memory of someone. And he said then we should never turn it off." That was the moment I understood. Some lights get passed down without anyone realizing. Not as burdens, but as beacons. Years went by. The boy grew. The tulips came back each spring. The town changed the sidewalks, but never that stretch. Every time I visited home, I'd swing by Maple Street. And every time, the light was still on. One year there was a storm. A hard one. The kind that knocks down trees and memories. The next morning, I drove by to check. Branches littered the yard. The porch railing was cracked. But the light? Still burning. The electricity had cut out across the neighborhood. Yet somehow, that bulb shone. Maybe they had a generator. Maybe they didn't. Maybe some things just refused to go dark. When I turned 40, my wife and I bought our own home. It had a porch. And it had a light. We didn't think much of it, just a fixture. Until one evening, I came home late. Everyone was asleep. The house was quiet. And the light was on. Warm. Still. Familiar. And I stood there, hand on the railing, and suddenly remembered everything. Mrs. Everett. Her quiet porch. That unspoken kindness. And a little boy who believed that some lights stayed on forever. I never turned that porch light off again. We didn't talk about it. There was no family meeting, no declaration, no sentiment. The porch light was simply left on, night after night. Sometimes my wife would ask, "Did you mean to leave it?" And I'd say, "Yeah. Just feels right." That was enough. My kids never knew about Mrs. Everett. They never saw that quiet glow on Maple Street or stood in the snow beneath a window that remembered. But they knew our light. They grew up with it. Coming home from piano lessons, from sleepovers, from their first awkward dates, it was always on. Sometimes I'd be reading in the front room when they pulled into the driveway, and I'd see their faces soften just slightly when the headlights caught that bulb. They'd never say it out loud, but I could feel the weight of it. "You're home." Someone waited. "This place remembers you." One night, my youngest, Maddie, came home from college. I'd left the porch light on like always. When she stepped inside, arms full of bags, she looked at me and said, "I don't even need to knock." That light tells me everything. She smiled. Then added more quietly, Please don't ever change that. I promised I wouldn't. And I meant it. The world got louder. Screens, schedules, speed, everything seemed urgent. But that one little light stayed still. It didn't buzz. Didn't flash. Didn't update. It just glowed, soft and patient. One winter, the bulb finally went out. I noticed it just before bed. I stood at the door for a long moment, staring at the dark porch. It looked wrong. Not broken. Just empty. I found a replacement in the garage, the kind of soft yellow Edison-style bulb that looked like it remembered things too. I screwed it in with careful fingers, flicked the switch. The glow returned. And for a moment, it felt like the house took a breath. Later that year, my mother passed. Quietly in her sleep. We sat in her old house for hours after, going through the rituals of memory. The photographs, the blankets, the scent of cinnamon in the curtains. Before we left, I stepped onto her porch. It was dusk. Cool. Still. I reached for the light switch. Paused. And turned it on. Not because anyone would see it. But because she would have. The funeral was small. But that night, when we drove home, my porch light was already on. It was the first thing I saw turning onto our street. The bulb hummed faintly in the cold air. I stood beneath it for a long time, thinking not of loss, but of presence. Of all the people I had ever waited for. And all those who had once waited for me. Years moved forward. My wife and I got older. The kids moved out. The house got quieter, but the light stayed loud in its own way. And eventually, one autumn, I heard from Maddie. She and her husband had bought a home. An old craftsman just outside of town. She was excited. Nervous. Ready. And in her last sentence, almost like an afterthought, she wrote, "Oh, the porch has a light. We're keeping it on." That was the moment I realized. It had happened. I had passed it on. Not a story. Not a lecture. Just an example. A quiet inheritance. A bulb left glowing long enough for someone else to find it useful. Sometimes I imagine Mrs. Everett, standing at her window, watching that little boy tie his shoes slowly near her hedge, pretending not to look at the light. And I wonder if she knew what she was starting. I hope so. Because she didn't just leave her porch lit. She lit mine. And now, through no grand effort, I had lit my daughter's. Some nights, I still step onto the porch. Even if no one's coming home. Even if the street is silent. I check the bulb. Brush off a cobweb. Feel the switch beneath my thumb. And I let it burn. Not out of habit. But out of belief. Because somewhere out there, someone might be on their way back. And I want them to know. This house remembers. You still belong here. We're still waiting, in the warmest way we can. I didn't notice myself becoming an old man. Not at first. Age arrives the way evening does on a long summer day, slow enough that you keep believing it's still afternoon. Then one night you step outside to take a look at the sky and discover the porch light has done more work than the sun. These days I move differently. I hold the rail when I take the stairs. I sit down to tie my shoes. I check the porch bulb more often than a reasonable person would. There's a little crack in the glass shade, almost invisible unless you know where to look. I've left it there, the way people leave the scar on a familiar tabletop, proof that a thing has been useful. The house has learned the ritual as well as I have. If we're away for a weekend, the timer keeps the rhythm, that modest click inside the outlet saying I remember our agreement. It's not the same as my hand on the switch, but I've decided memory is allowed to be mechanical sometimes, if the intention is human. Maddie visits with her kids. They run up the steps, announce themselves with the certainty only children possess, and then, my favorite part, they glance up automatically to make sure the bulb is burning. They don't need it to find the key. They just need it the way wild geese need the angle of each other's wings. Direction is made in company. They ask about the old days the way children always do, half curiosity, half audition for the parts they might someday play. I tell them small things, about the grocer who always tucked the bread on top, about their great-grandmother's cinnamon that lived in the curtains, about a porch on Maple Street where a light stayed on so long that it became a verb. I don't speak of grief in the hard voice. I let it ride on the soft current of ordinary details, bulbs, timers, the way moths draw little spirals around a truth. A storm came through last fall, a real one, the kind that pushes trees into new opinions. The power went out across 3 neighborhoods. The sky turned the color of unripe plums. After, when the wind had emptied itself, people came out onto their porches to count shingles and check on one another. I stood at my rail with a flashlight like everyone else. Then the generators started. Not many, just enough for the town to remember we had all grown clever since the years when silence was a whole sound. A hum rolled from house to house. Across the street, a neighbor's porch bulb fluttered to life, and another porch followed, and another. I fetched the small generator I'd bought and rarely used, kissed my knuckles against superstition, and coaxed my circuit awake. The light came on with a bravery I wanted to deserve. Something happened then. People lifted their faces. Footsteps came down walkways. Someone laughed in the particular way people laugh when they are surprised to be relieved. We shared extension cords like casseroles. A boy down the block, taller by the week, voice surprising him mid-sentence, lit his family's porch, then tugged his father's sleeve and pointed down the line. "Look," he said, simple and proud, as if he had invented the idea himself. We did look. For one brief hour our street was a string of lanterns, each one insisting softly that after is still a kind of during, and we are allowed to meet it together. When the power returned, so did the quiet. But it felt different, as if the street had learned a chorus it could sing again when needed. I keep a box beside the broom closet now, bulbs of the same warm color, their filaments dressed like old handwriting. I've labeled it, in a shaky pen, for the porch. If a future version of this house ever wonders which light matters, I want the answer to be easy to find. I've begun to make small arrangements that older people make. A folder for paperwork, a list of things that should be serviced each season, a note tucked into the manual for the thermostat that says ignore page 12, it lies. Among these, under the rubber band that holds the water bill and the valve diagram, is an envelope addressed to whoever comes next. Inside, a letter. Asterisk, this switch by the door controls more than a bulb. It has, over the years, welcomed children back from storms, sent college students on their way with courage, and explained to strangers that this house has a good memory. You owe nothing to my habits. Houses are for the living. But if you can bear it, leave the light on at night. Someone, somewhere, might be looking for a sign that they have not fallen out of the world. It costs a little money. It spends a little kindness. I have found the exchange favorable. The previous keeper of the light. Asterisk. I don't know whether they'll read it. Perhaps it will be recycled with the appliance manuals and the catalogs no one asked for. But I like imagining a hand pausing, a brow lifting, a decision softened. On Memorial Day the town gathers around the green, and names are spoken the way bells speak, clearly, with the understanding that sound is both a presence and a permission to feel. Afterward, some families drive home, others linger. I walk the long way. It's an old man's privilege, this exaggerated loop through streets I've lived in so long that my feet know where the sidewalks buckle. I count porch lights the way birders count sightings. More than you'd think. Fewer than I wish. Enough to keep the arithmetic of hope honest. Sometimes I pass the house where Mrs. Everett's light first taught me the shape of welcome. The shutters have been painted again, a kinder blue. The wind chime still stutters at the edge of the awning. The current owners keep their bulb on most nights, though not all. I do not judge them. Rituals become burdens when they are policed. I prefer grace. When it's on, I nod in gratitude. When it's not, I lend mine across the block, and we call the sum sufficient. A strange compliment found me last winter. The teenage boy 2 doors down came home near midnight, no coat in December, of course, and stopped at the bottom of my steps. He didn't climb them. He just stood there a moment under the glow, hands in his pockets, exhaling a practiced indifference into the cold. Then he looked up and said, "Not quite to me, not quite to the air. I like this light." He walked on before I could answer. I didn't need to. He hadn't asked a question. He had recognized a landmark. There will be a night, sooner or later, when I forget to replace the bulb, or my hands will be less certain on the ladder, or the hour will outrun me. If that night arrives while I'm still here, I hope a neighbor will notice and knock. If it arrives after I'm gone, I hope the letter in the envelope will do what my voice cannot. But here is what comforts me most. I am no longer the only keeper. Maddie leaves hers on now. She texted me a photo the first week, a little square of honeyed light carved into the dark, her caption, "Still our thing." The kids in her neighborhood have begun to use her house the way migratory birds use a reliable star. My son, who lives in an apartment without a porch, tapes a warm LED behind his front window every night so the hallway learns a softer definition of safe. A friend across town told me that since his wife's diagnosis, strangers have begun leaving casseroles under a glow he didn't realize anyone noticed. "At first," he said, "I thought it was a coincidence. Now I think it's a language." That is exactly right. The porch light is a small, stubborn dialect of care. What I once believed was a private memory has quietly turned into a custom that belongs to more people than I will ever meet. I see it in neighborhoods I only pass through, single bulbs marking coordinates of kindness, chains of glow stepping over hills, a bungalow near the rail yard standing like a tiny lighthouse that refuses to measure its worth by the size of the sea. I keep the switch near at hand when sleep is restless. I have begun to regard the late hours as a territory I also own, and if a traveler crosses my block then, I want them to find the border kind. Sometimes I sit in the chair by the window and let the light burn while the television mutters to itself at a volume only memory can hear. I don't always turn the set on. The glow on the porch is show enough. People ask, now and then, what we're supposed to do with all the noise in the world, all the distances that open like sudden roads between us. I don't know. I am just one man with an old house and a reliable bulb. But I have found this to be true. If you cannot bridge the miles with your feet, you can shorten the night with your light. The doctors are gentle, the way good doctors are when their news is a map rather than a cure. I am not alarmed. I have been many people, and now I am becoming the final one. The pantry is in order. The toolbox has been given to someone whose hands are younger. The letter for whoever comes next is sealed. The timer is set. The spare bulbs are where I said they would be. I test the switch one more time. Click. A small sun rises at the edge of my house. Moths begin their cartography. Somewhere, far down the street, a car slows, then continues, its driver assessing the world and deciding it is survivable for one more night. If after I am gone, you pass by this place and notice that the porch is still lit, don't think of me as a ghost. Think of me as good instructions. Think of the Everetts, and the boy who pretended to tie his shoes, and the daughter who started her own small galaxy, and the neighbor who paused at the bottom step to borrow a little courage. Think of all the doors you have approached in your life that opened first with a light. And if, wherever you live, your own evening feels heavy, and the house around you seems larger than your heart, consider this small work, turn something on for someone else. A hallway lamp. A stair light. A porch bulb if you have one. Leave it burning a little longer than necessary. Leave it for the person who is late, the one who is lost, the one who isn't sure they are allowed to come back. Leave it for yourself, too, because that is permitted. After I am gone, leave it on. The light will remember what to do,